Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOonline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette. As we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today has been training the martial arts for over 45 years and currently holds a rank of 7th degree black belt in Tae Kwon Do. For 20 years, he owned and ran two of the largest martial arts schools in the nation, teaching more than 800 students weekly, and co-managed 11 other schools in the San Jose, California, and surrounding Bay Area communities. He also earned his black belt in BJJ after 25 years of training at the age of 60. Many of his students have gone on to be teachers, school owners, and professional athletes, with one of his most well-known students being retired UFC fighter BJ Penn. In addition to training, he spent 25 years as a business and curriculum consultant to the international martial arts community. I could go on, but I'd rather hear it from himself. So please welcome my guest today, Mr. Tom Callos. How you doing today, Tom?
I really appreciate your having me on the show. And let me adjust my bio because that must have been an old one.
Oh.
I started my first lesson in 1969, a lesson in judo.
Okay.
So it was over 50 years.
Oh, wow.
And, but, who's counting?
Hey, I know. After a while, I was like, do I really want to update my bio every single year? So, yeah, I get that.
Well, I also have to mention that one of my other students I'm very, very proud of, and I have a bunch of them, is my son, stepson, actually, Keenan Cornelius. He runs Legion. It's a jiu-jitsu school in San Diego, and he was, as both a brown belt and a black belt, a champion in jiu-jitsu, one of the top players, and is deeply respected, and he knows jiu-jitsu 1,000 times better than I. And the last time I rolled with him, he said to me, "Hey, Dad, you used a technique. Good job."
That's
and
great.
I should have killed him when he was young, but I didn't, and now he's too big. So,
well, what we like to do with all my guests, I know I mentioned, over, almost 50 years and stuff, but what I want to do is I want to go back to the beginning. I want to know what led to that. What led to that first interest in martial arts? Where did that first spark come from?
It was 64, 66. I can't recall. I've written about it before. I saw Bruce Lee in The Green Hornet, and I went, well, there's somebody. I think, and two, kids gravitate towards martial arts, or at least I can speak for myself, because you may feel vulnerable or you want to have a distinction about who you are and how you behave. And Bruce Lee piqued my interest. Then I found a Bruce Tegner book in my third grade school library. And so I checked that out. And then I started doing the poses, and then I was walking through my community. It was a decommissioned Air Force base, and there was an old gym. And I walked in, and there's 4 or 5 judoka there, men going through drills. And so I sat and watched. And at the end of their class, they invited me on and showed me some break falls and throwing and rolls. And I would show up on occasion, and, they'd be kind enough to teach me something at the end of class. From there, my family moved in. This is now 1971 to Sparks, which is a community adjacent to Reno, Nevada. And there was a Tae Kwon Do teacher there who I'm still friends with, who I earned my first degree with after, it was 8 or 10 years of training, because at that time he wasn't really hot on giving black belts to kids.
Yeah.
And I tested under him at 19. His name is Master Lou Grosso. He was an ITF, International Taekwondo Federation guy, and really strong basics, just every kick, every punch, perfect, every stance, And after I got my black belt, I had been starting to compete on the circuit in California, and I ran into people who had a Choi's West Coast demonstration team on the back of their shirt and their uniforms. And that became Ernie Reyes's West Coast.
Yep.
And I saw these guys, and I went, okay, who's that? And there was a rumor that Taekwondo was going to be in the Olympics, and I thought, that's what I want to do. And then, I'm 19 or 20. So I jump on my Honda 750, pack my stuff, kiss my girlfriend goodbye, and head down to the to stay on a friend's couch who just happened to live down the street from him. He was an old Tracy's black belt, and he had told me about Mr. Reyes, and I've been with Mr. Reyes ever since. That was 1980 or 81.
Wow.
And it was Mr. Reyes who had Half and Caesar Gracie opened a school just a few miles down the road from him, and he started taking lessons. Yep. And he told all his senior people, there were about 15 of us, 4th, 5th, 6th dan, and he said, you guys have to learn jiu-jitsu. So I had sold my schools to my senior students because I thought I was going to become a writer because I was having some hip problems. And I thought, well, what else can I do? I contemplated a bookstore, writing, so on and so forth. I moved to the Big Island to cover a friend's school. A guy named Dan Magnus was a full contact fighter. He had to have heart surgery for the second time, I think it was. So Nick Kokinos, who ran Educational Funding Company, and I sat on their board of directors, he asked me if I could, while I was free, go to Hawaii and cover Dan's school, because the last time he had gone through surgery, it had to close because he couldn't maintain it and he didn't have enough students. So anyway, I was looking at Iowa City and Fayetteville, Arkansas, places that had well-known writers programs because I was going to go back to school. And so I had to weigh it, Iowa, Hawaii. So I went to Hawaii, and then I ended up living there about 7 years. That's where I met a girl, as I'd gone through a divorce. I'd met a nice lady, and she and I moved to Hilo from Kona, which is on the other side of the Big Island. And I had just come back from a trip, and Mr. Reyes had just told us, get your jiu-jitsu game on. So I had taken lessons, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 lessons. I was still just the most novice white belt, but I knew how to practice. And when I got to Hilo, the very day I got there, she had gone and found a house before I arrived. And so I talked to the landlord via the phone and set it up and made sure he had payment. And when I got to town, the first thing I did before we even looked at the house is I went to the local gyms, weightlifting gyms, and put up some flyers because I knew I'd need training partners because I was a year out from testing. At that time, I think it was 6th on under Mr. Reyes with about 13 of my classmates. So we get to the house after I put out the flyers. It isn't a half an hour later. I plug in the phone, which we'd already had hooked up, and the phone rings. Okay. So I answer it, and the guy talking, I'm like, I know this guy's voice. I don't know anybody in Hilo. Turned out it was BJ Penn's dad, who I'd rented the house from.
Nice.
And he said, my boys brought this flyer home, and they want to do this. So I set it up, and BJ and his brothers came over, and I tortured him. I tortured him for about, I don't know, it was about 3 months maybe. And all this, and then they were doing study and training in BJ's basement, like UFC, no holds barred, which I never participated in.
Yeah.
I opened the door one time to go say hi. I heard him fighting down there, and I just gently closed it and went back home because no way I'm going to let those punks suck me into that. And so after a while, he started just to being BJ. And one day I was tired. I had trained earlier in the day, and I was in good shape, but I was fatigued. And I said, BJ, let's not grapple today. Let's just slap box with me a little bit. I want to see how you move. So the little bastard hits me in the face about 9 times before I can flinch. Now I'm chasing him all over this old dojo that we practiced at, a rec center in Hilo. And, he's got 40 other opportunities to hit me. The guy had movement, timing, distance. He just had it. And I remember walking home that day because I had jogged there, and I thought, that's it. It's over. Just got my ass handed to me by a 17-year-old, Fortunately, he became a world champion. So my son started training with us at 4, showing up for classes intermittently, and I was running a small school there. BJ's father had gifted me for a year a Quonset hut downtown that had been a dojo. So I just moved right in, and BJ and I started training. He had started having his friends, and it's steamrolled from there. Now, there was no jiu-jitsu on the island except one blue belt on a way far distant remote part of it. And he would come and meet me once a week when I lived in Kona, and we'd roll. Okay. And at the time, I thought he was great, but he was a neck cranker. He was rough around the edges. But the way that BJ got to the next level is Mr. Reyes was having his 50th birthday party. He just turned 78. But he had his 50th birthday party, and BJ had never been off the Big Island. So I asked his dad, I said, you want to have him come with me? Half and Caesar are just down the street. I'll go introduce you or him. And so he came with me, and I introduced him to Half that day. David Camarillo was there, a bunch of veterans, and BJ performed really well. And his dad paid his way to move down there. And not a year and a half later, he won the Worlds as a black belt, the only non-Brazilian to ever win the Brazilian World Championships in Brazil, and nobody even scored a point on him.
Wow.
He was a phenom, and that's how he got into the UFC. He actually came to me once and said, I'm thinking about being a fighter. And I looked at him and I said, BJ, you don't want to be a fighter. There's no money in that. Because at the time, everybody was PK. They were small purses, or never getting their purse, or, whatever. And fortunately, he didn't listen to me. And the UFC hadn't really got its legs yet.
Yeah.
And so he did really well there, of course. And I remember another day when he showed up at the dojo with a few of his buddies who were training with us. And he said, hey, we went over to a local judo school and we tapped out the instructor. Like, no. I had to teach them some etiquette, and, they were just Hawaii street urchins, good kids though, but they like to scrap.
Yeah. That's awesome. I want to back up a little. So that first Taekwondo school, a couple of things about that. First of all, that very first Taekwondo school, what was it about it that you said you were there 9-10 years? What was it about it that drew you in? What was it about the instructor or that style that made you just feel like it was the right place to be?
Well, I think it's the same ingredients that keep a lot of people at schools. My family was in turmoil because we had 7 kids, and my dad was working like a dog, and he had remarried a woman who wasn't maybe as nice as I would have liked to have her to be. And so it gave me an opportunity to get out, and I had a place to go. It was like an extended part of my family. I was treated well. And Mr. Grosso took me under his wing, and I used to drive with him in his Corvette, which he still owns all these years later, up to Tahoe, because he had a pilot program up there that he taught in South Lake Tahoe once a week. So in the summers, I would drive up with him, and it was a nice arrangement. And like so many instructors who might be listening to this, those kids under your wing that you show respect to, that you pat on the back and teach them to stand still, and pay attention. It's a gift. Yeah. It's a real gift.
That's cool. And you mentioned competition. What drew you to the competition side of martial arts?
I think it was the thing to do. Everybody was, we were all, well, first of all, when you're preteen, you don't have full frontal brain lobe development. So
that is true.
You don't have the common sense to stay out of that stuff. But there were tournaments locally. And I think the first one I ever went to, Mr. Grosso ran, and a guy named Pugil Kwan came. Now, Pugil Kwan wrote a book with O'Hara Publications about breaking. And he was known as something like the Ghost because he had, in the war, Korean War, he had gone out, or maybe it was Vietnam, probably Korea, but he had gone out, and he was the only one that returned from his platoon that survived.
Wow.
And he was a big guy. And I remember he walked in, I'm like a gold belt. I'm maybe 10, 11, 12, I don't even know. And he walks into this big gym, and the matches are already going. He's there to be a demonstrator and a guest. And he walks in with this big Superman cape, like a blue and red cape. And he's a big guy, big Korean. And he walks through, and we're all like, And so I happen to have to go to the bathroom. So I walk into the gym's latrine, and there he is next to me doing his thing. I'm doing my thing. And I'm like, oh my God, this is Pugil Kwan. So on the way out, after we wash our hands, and after the way out, I'm walking next to him in the hallway back to the gym, and I reach over to touch his shoulder, and he moves it, like, don't you touch me kind of thing. And I could tell now in hindsight, of course, that he recognized that he hurt my feelings. So when we get in the gym, he picks up a paddle, kicking paddle, and he motions me over, and he has me hold the paddle for him while he warms up with kicks,
Nice.
But that was my first tournament. And then we used to drive over the Sierra to Sacramento, Stockton, San Francisco, San Jose, Modesto. There was just a big circuit of tournaments down there, a lot of them run by Leo Fong and Ron Marchini, and there were others, California Karate League and all that. It was good. That's where I met as a teenager, I met one of my best friends, Dave Kovar, who still runs schools in Sacramento.
Yep, I've had Dave on the show.
Oh, very good.
And then you mentioned having schools and teaching. What drew you to the teaching side of martial arts? What made you want to teach?
A summer of working construction.
Okay.
I just knew the first day I walked in Mr. Gross's school, he wasn't there. He was up in Salt Lake because Ju Bong and Ju Song Lee were up there with a bunch of ITF black belts giving a demonstration for a school that was opening. And they went up, and I don't know if you know who the Huarling Do guys were, but they were on That's Incredible and all that. They were great. But so I walked into the dojo as assistant teacher, and I just knew at some level this is what I was going to do. And so I pursued the training like that. And when you're interested in something and you're young, you can absorb it.
Yeah.
When you're interested in something and you're 65, like I am today, you don't actually absorb it. You have to kind of, wear it around like it depends, No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I just took it in, and I had an eye for detail and an eye and a good memory. And so I just started soaking the stuff up, and I read all the martial arts magazines that we could find in Reno, and cover to cover. And, at that time, there was no real video out. You watched a movie, and that's where you'd pick things up. But the advantage of martial artists today is you can pull up YouTube and you can watch the best people in the world and make them do it in slow motion and watch them repetitively. And the learning would have just catapulted, from that point. But back then it was just 5 pictures. 1, the guy sets up. 2, he's extending. 3rd is the back fist. We practiced a lot because it beat mowing lawns and doing chores at home and hang out at the school, and Mr. Grosso was very dedicated, full-timer. And we had a lot of people who were serious about their practice. So it allowed me to be in a good environment to learn.
Do you remember the very first time you taught a class all on your own?
Yeah, I'd rather not talk about it. But it's a process, I used to think, it's about what is a good instructor. And I might as well go off on that. I used to think I was a good instructor because I was better than you and I could beat you up, so obviously I'm a good teacher. And then I grew up a little bit, and my next level was, look at my students. I mean, my students are winning at the tournaments. I must be a good instructor. That's indicative of that. And then I matured a little more. Then I recognized that it was look at the size of my school. Look at the car I drive. Look at the gross income of the school. I mean, we're doing nearly $1 million a year. Well, obviously, I'm a good instructor. And then I grew up yet again, and I realized that the real measure of a good teacher is not his or her own performance, and not necessarily the physical performance of their students, although it's a factor. It's part of the ingredients. It's what the students do with what they're learning and how they're practicing with those skills outside of the dojo and away from anything that has to do with punching, kicking, or choking somebody, how they take the work out of the dojo and put it to work in the world. And when I started seeing students apply the perseverance and the self-control and all the things that we talk so much about to things outside of the martial arts, I recognized, now that's what a teacher does. You transcend the subject matter, and it affects your life. And more importantly than your life, you learn to affect the lives of people around you.
Nice.
So I call it the black dot theory. When I was running a program called the Ultimate Black Belt Test, which was an experimental avant-garde black belt testing program, because I was sick of watching funky or ruthless black belt tests. I thought we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading a magazine called Adbusters, which is an anti-consumerism publication. And they had this concept called the black dot, where if you bought a shirt or a pair of shoes that had a brand name on it, you just put this black dot on it. You're not representing the company, right? Because, I thought, what if we did a black belt test where you passed or failed, not based on what you did. We just put a black dot over you like a black hole and see how your work affects the people in your sphere of influence.
Okay.
And I thought that was maybe for me, it was the most profound measurement of what I was hoping to achieve, what I had been taught about the martial arts, and what I had fantasized was, the ultimate outcome from the training was, and also at that time in the 60s, actually I wasn't training in the 60s, I started in 69, but during that period, activism, environmental activism, our heroes, there was something about that affected me. And I thought, if I'm going to produce really top black belts, they're not just going to be good athletes. I want them to, if I can have an impact on them, I'd like them to be people I would look up to, and for the right reasons. And so has something to do with what you asked me.
Yeah, definitely. And I was reading a little bit about that Ultimate Black Belt test you talked about, and it talks about doing like 50,000 push-ups and stuff. And
it was a year-long test, a year-long test, which means you signed up and participated for a year. And we did 50,000 push-ups in a year. It's only 120, 30 a day, which reason being is that the real, measurement of success isn't that you can study for a subject the night before and go ace the test. And then your retention is, that's how I did it in college, right? But that if you did something consistently enough, and to do 50,000 push-ups on a test would be impossible.
Yeah.
But to do them through the year, it's possible. So 50,000 sit-ups, 50,000 push-ups, 1,000 acts of kindness. You had to be a catalyst for 50,000 acts of kindness. Or was it 1,000? Yeah, 1,000 acts of kindness. So you had to, management is getting things done through the efforts of others. You had to mobilize your students to participate. And then there was a day in a wheelchair, a day blind, a day mute, 1,000 repetitions of a single kata. You had to mend 3 relationships that had gone south and fix 3 wrongs you'd done in your life. You had to choose a dietary program because you had to come in the best shape of your life. You had to treat it like the Olympics, and you had a year to train. And then we did 3 events. There were other requirements too, like if you hadn't boxed, you had to get with a boxing coach and do 10 hours or something, because I just hated watching really advanced martial arts guys who couldn't punch their way out of a wet paper bag, Yeah. And then eventually we had grappling requirements, a form to learn that Mr. Reyes had taught. But we also, where was I going with that? I think that we had 3 activities. We met for an environmental cleanup project. One time, for example, we met at the Golden Gate in San Francisco. We went under the Golden Gate Bridge. There had been a big storm, a bunch of stuff had washed up. And Dan Millman joined us, who wrote Way of the Peaceful Warriors.
Yep, he's also been on the show.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And he came down and helped us do a beach cleanup. Then we did all kinds of other activities. And one time we were in one of the events, because I ran the program for 7 years, I think.
Wow.
We were in the Bowery in New York, and we went to the Mission and peeled potatoes for Thanksgiving. We just would do something. And then we'd do a 4-day hike on the Pacific Crest Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And with no cell phones, no tents. You had to sleep in the outback. And there were usually about 15 to 20 of us. And it was the funniest thing, because most of the people had no camping or backpacking experience. Like one guy came with Tae Kwon Do shoes on, which, have no soles, basically, and was going to wheel his luggage, his carry-on, with cans of food in it up into the Sierra. So I had to set him straight. As dumb as dirt. Excuse me if you're listening, but you know you are. And then we had one guy bring his son's Barney sleeping bag. And we had to rescue him because he was, going to get hypothermia. Another guy covered his whole body in deets, and we had to carry him out. But we would do this, this trip, and it was really fun and interesting. And I remember on one of the trips, everybody was just, kind of grumpy because we weren't getting a lot of sleep, and I was marching them pretty hard, and they were carrying heavy. I stopped bringing any food after the first trip because I recognized that everybody was such a novice that they were overpacking so much. I didn't have to carry any. I'd just eat out of their packs, which, I thought was funny, but I'm not sure everybody appreciated. But we met a woman with a backpack the size of, I don't know, a pillow. Like small pillow. And her name was Mountain Butterfly. So we all stopped to talk to her because she looked to be in her 70s. And we said, what are you doing? Are you on a day hike? She says, no, I'm coming up from Mexico, and I'm headed to the Canada border, and I live near there. We're looking at her and so everybody kind of shut up after that.
That's awesome. So how many total people completed that over the 7 years you did it?
I've forgotten, but it was more than 100.
Oh, wow. Not bad.
Yeah, it was interesting. Not everybody, passed. A lot of people took it and didn't want to be ranked. I have a friend, Randy Edwards. He teaches Tae Kwon Do, veteran teacher in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And we're doing the program. I've published the website. All the requirements are on there. And somebody calls me and says, have you seen this guy's website? He just took it right off yours, and he's running the same program for students in the school. He says, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I don't know who he is, but I'm going to give him a call. So I call Randy, And I said, Randy, of all the people that I've taught and of all the people that have gone through these 2 or 3 ultimate black belt tests that I've run, nobody has done this. You didn't even take the program, and you saw something you liked and you borrowed from it. And that's what I want. I want this program to affect people that I'll never meet, to steal the ideas, to borrow them. But you're going to have to do the next UBBT, or I'm going to fly out there and kick your ass. And he did, and he's been a friend ever since, and he aced the program. But I thought I saw so many teachers were making their students do things they'd never done themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That I thought, no, you want to put your students through this, you got to come and do it.
That's cool.
That way you'll know what's hard and you'll know what's easy. And I think one of the good qualities of having looking at a year is you can include all kinds of things, all kind of reading and activities and trips that you'd never do in a weekend or a night-long test.
Mm-hmm.
And you can fail. You could fail half the time and still do 10 times more than most people were ever doing for their training.
True. Nice.
So it was interesting, and a lot of people went through it. Not everybody passed, but everybody took something from it, good memories, and it affected their students. And it allowed me to experiment, with, I think this is a good idea. Let's try it. And some of them failed and didn't have the effect I'd hoped for, and then others surprised me. For example, one of the requirements was you had to profile 10 living heroes. And the reason that we did that, or I did that, was that I was talking to my students and various black belts. Well, what are you reading? Who do you admire? And I've always been a people person, reading historical accounts of government and history and explorers. And I'm an artist today, and those are mostly the people that I do. I'm mostly doing portraiture.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of them couldn't define it. So I said, okay, we're going to make it a requirement that you have to reach out to 10 people who you consider to be living heroes, which required everybody to say, well, what's a hero? What do I respect people for? So one of the participants in one of the tests, he's a Grammy Award-winning country music songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't listen to that crap, so I didn't know who he was. And he wrote Maya Angelou.
Oh, wow.
And said, I really, you're one of my living heroes. This is the program I'm doing, so on and so forth. And his name's Skip Ewing, by the way, for any country music fans out there. And son of a gun, if Maya Angelou's secretary didn't call him. And he ended up going and staying with Maya Angelou with his daughter for a week as they wrote songs together and poetry.
That's
so that
cool.
was the advantage of having a living hero, was that you could possibly meet them. Like when I was a kid, I wrote Ray Bradbury because I had read Dandelion Wine or Martian Chronicles or something. And he wrote me back, and we maintained a correspondence, and I got to meet him for, 30, 40 years before his death. And that profoundly affected me. And so that ability to connect with people you admire, I thought that was great. And I thought, 10 might be good for somebody testing for second, third to seventh or whatever.
Yep.
But for a kid, maybe 1, maybe 2. I wanted everybody to go through it to say, so they could decide, hey, this impacted me emotionally, or this was worthwhile, or this was a waste of time.
Yeah.
And then go back to their own schools and customize what they do. Because I was asked by John Graydon when I worked for NAPMA for a few years as a consultant to them and helped design their programs. And anybody who doesn't know, NAPMA is the National Association of Professional Martial Artists, which is now defunct. But at the time, it was landmark. They had over 1,000 schools participating, and we produced a monthly package that included magazines and ad slicks and video and so on. So I would design a lot of that. And I'm telling you that because bring me back to where I was going. Can you do it?
Well, I mean, you were talking about the people, writing to their heroes, living heroes. Yeah.
Well, I'll remember in a minute. Okay. I've got that 65-year-old thing. So let's move on to the next thing. But, I know what I was going to say. Okay. NAPMA wanted me to design a curriculum that everybody could follow. And I pretty much refused. I made some token efforts towards it, but I didn't think it was a good idea. Because teachers should teach what they know, not what they don't know. In fact, you can't teach what you don't know. So when you go into a martial arts school and there's no mention of diabetes, which will affect 1 in 3 children in the next decade, they say, either directly or indirectly, and it's a horrible disease, you're more likely to contract diabetes through poor dietary habits or through genetics than you ever are to be attacked by somebody in a dark alley.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it because we don't know squat about it. We don't talk about nonviolent conflict resolution or anger management or all those things because there's no training programs for it, even though they're directly related to personal protection and well-being, because we have an industry that just hasn't been able to yet evolve there, although there are exceptions and standouts.
Yeah.
And so to design a curriculum that everybody follows didn't sound right to me. You go out and you learn. And if you're an artist, art affects the way you teach. If you're a student of history, that affects it. If you studied anatomy and physiology, that's going to affect your teaching. So it's not the style, the system, the guy's instructor, whatever. It's what is your education, because that's what you're going to impart. Anything else has a little smell of inauthenticity.
Right. It's kind of funny. You mentioned the whole thing about writing to your heroes, basically, and contacting your heroes and getting to meet them. That's essentially what I was doing with this podcast when I started it.
It's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
If I would have known about podcasts, because at the time, people weren't even blogging yet.
Yeah.
It was 2004. So Fariborz Jacques, who is
also been on the show.
Oh, good. Hi, Fariborz. Is a friend of mine. He developed the first website for the UBBT because he was the only guy who was really deep into programming that I knew. And it had a journaling component upon my request. So everybody was required to make a journal entry once a week.
That's cool.
And that was interesting because their memories and so on. And it's so evolved now, but at the time it was pretty interesting. And I noticed too that a lot of instructors are sadly inarticulate about the benefits of what they do. They know it in their heart, they know it in their head, but they have trouble verbalizing. So when people started writing and making videos and so on, I warned them, they're going to suck. But you just like when you first walked into school, so you just have to put in repetitive practice. And a lot of the people who took the test, I think they progressed as communicators because they were put to the test. And basically, you had to write the same thing over and over again of why you love martial arts, what are the benefits and so on, and find different language and express what you were doing and how it related to being a test. And it was my thinking that most people who would see a black belt test, because they had all these preconceived ideas about what a black belt was taught, what skills they had and so on from popular media mostly. But if they saw most black belt tests, I think they'd be severely disappointed. They weren't very impressive.
Yeah.
They were more like hazings. And so by testing for a year and accumulating this portfolio of activities that relate to anger and diet and injury prevention and community involvement and issues of emotion and maturity and kindness and so on. It lent credit to what we do. It gave validity, I thought, and nobody had to. One of the problems I had with my own black belts is I just took over their lives.
Yeah.
We were training so intensely for the last 6 months. I had it called special training. We'd meet 1, then 2, then 3 times a week. And I just won them. And, and they stopped doing chores and their work suffered and their wives didn't know their names. And I thought if I had it to do it again, I would start farther back. Start your black belt training at green or brown belt and do a little bit at a time instead of trying to jam it all down their throats in the last 6 months because you walk in, you assess everybody and you panic and go, holy, I got to bring these people down in front of Ernie Reyes and the gang? No way. So I would torture them into better form and shape, and it just wasn't the right thing to do.
I get that. Yeah, I remember cramming for 6 months, literally 7 days a week, plus for my black belt test, and it was insane.
Yeah. Well, there's merits to it. There's merit to it.
Yes,
but
definitely.
I thought for the average person, for guys like you and I and a lot of our peers, we went through torture, and we did it with a smile.
Yes.
But it's not for everybody. And if you want to run a school that serves your entire community and gives benefits, and they're not all like big schools, typically, small schools keep mostly A students, ones that show up every time, you beat on them and they show up and climb through the transom to get there the next day. And then the B's and C's are chased away. Big schools that retain their students, don't do as well for the instructor's ego because a lot of the people are struggling, but they would have quit any other school. You're keeping them. And in my mind, we're not really teaching martial arts. None of us. That's not the real essence of the lessons.
Mhm.
The essence is to return for the next practice. Because without repetitive, mindful practice, all the rest of the stuff is just BS. It's superficial. It's not nearly as useful. So you have to teach classes that make people want to come back for the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, that's not that easy sometimes.
True. That is true. So do you remember the very first student that you had that started with you as a white belt and you brought them all the way to black?
Yeah, I think so. I think his name, well, let me think. I had a group, a small group that joined,
Mm-hmm.
and they all went up to black belt together.
Really?
And they're still,
That's impressive.
3 or 4, a couple kids, and a friend of mine, Steve Kissel, who came in to the dojo. I had a really small thing. Actually, when I first opened, and I moved back from San Jose to Reno to run my school because a West Coast black belt had moved to Reno. And I thought, oh, good, I'll have somebody to train with. And I was starving in San Jose. My family owned a business I could work for in Reno. And so I had been scabbing in San Jose, and I was, like the dollar theater was a luxury. So I went back to Reno after a couple of years, and the black belt who had moved there I was going to train with stayed for a while and moved back to San Jose. And we had these students. We had both collected them, this small group of students. And I called Mr. Reyes and I said, sir, I'm coming back. I don't want to be a school owner. He said, no. You have some students, you stay there. You're going to learn a lot more from this than you will training with me down here. And he was, he was right. So I stayed on, and I was splitting I approached another school that was just barely hanging on. They were in a storage locker in an industrial area. And I said, hey, I'll come in and I'll split the rent with you, it was enormous. It was like $350 a month. I'll split it with you, and I'll use the dojo on these days. You use it on that. So that was the first school. And this kid, Steve Kissel, walks in. He's my age or a little older, and he's all tatted up, total shirt sleeve tats. And I thought, oh, great, my first fight in the dojo. Sweetest bunny rabbit of a guy, loyal, kind, loving. And to this day, he's just so respectful. It embarrasses me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So over your martial arts career, you ever get into weapons training at all?
Well, Mr. Reyes required Kali and Eskrima, although I heard Dan Anderson call Eskrima something else. Anyway, Arnis. He calls it Arnis.
Yep.
And he trained under Remy Precis, as did Mr. Reyes.
Yep.
So I'm confused. But yeah, we did some stick fighting. We did knives and, just all kinds of BS stuff that, nothing really intense, but little snippets, as if you were learning world literature from reading a chapter of, 10 of the greatest books. It wasn't an in-depth study for me anyway, although some people went there. It was more, I have to do this for my test, so let me become proficient. But, it was hard enough.
It wasn't a weapon that jumped out at you and you kind of decided to keep going with it?
Mostly my mouth. That was my biggest
That's a good weapon.
But it got me in a lot of trouble. But I didn't, I was deeply involved in kicking. I wanted to be an amazing kicker. And of course, today I've had 4 complete hip replacements. So
wow.
Comes with a price, overtraining. And, I remember going into the dojo and the bag was a mattress strapped to the wall, As a kid, you can't, as any age, you can't constantly hit things that don't move without having repercussions on your joint.
Yep.
But maybe somebody warned me back then, but of course I didn't listen, and I probably wouldn't listen if I had to do it again.
It's true. I was warned about lots of, I had a doctor, I blew my ACL out the day before my 16th birthday. And back then, this was in 1990. Back then they wouldn't do reconstructive surgery on a young person because they weren't done growing. So I had supposed to wait till I was like, he's like, you won't be able to do any martial arts or any of this, any basketball, any skateboarding, none of this until after we do the surgery. And then it'll probably be a couple of years even after that. And I just basically, I'm like, screw you, doc. And I just went and went to rehab and started like going to physical therapy. And first time I'd ever lifted weights in my life and to this day, I've never had my knee rebuilt.
Isn't that funny?
30 years ago. So.
I was starting to have, I remember I've got a picture of me testing with my best friend at the time. We started together and we tested together for black belt, just the two of us.
Nice.
Mark Brandt was his name. He lives in Reno, and I talk to him every month or so. Super talented, mega flexible kid, vertical side, nothing impossible. A vertical leap like unbelievable.
Nice.
And I have a picture of us because the newspaper came down and did a big spread on us when we were testing, of us both in child pose, like a yoga pose, while we were resting between this horrific endurance thing that Mr. Gruffalo put us through. And he's down flat. I mean, he is just totally like an egg. And I'm up a bit. I can't completely compress. So I'm already having some issues. And prior to that, I was having some back issues, but my family owned a lock and safe company. So I was moving safes and things like that. It wasn't just martial arts, but I was having back pain and I was on good insurance. So I went. I finally got an MRI the doctor ordered, and he said, "Oh, I didn't realize you'd worn hip braces as a kid." I said, "No, I hadn't." He said, "Well, you were in a horrific accident." I said, "No." He said, "What have you done?" My femurs were already turning in from the impacts, and bone spurs. And that was at 19. And so I made it all the way to about 40. I think it was 40 before I had my first two replacements, because I was strong and tough and, but I was having trouble back then, and it's led to me, having to retire because I'm just crippled up. I can walk without pain. I can still move and go to yoga and do circuit training, but I was getting ready to fight in the Master Worlds in Jiu-Jitsu as a brown belt. And I hadn't been in a jiu-jitsu tournament before, although I'd competed in hundreds of karate tournaments. And I was nervous. But anyway, you sign up in advance. They publish the brackets so you can Google the guys you're going to fight, right? And one of them had been a brown belt judo champion. And I said, okay, got to get ready for that. So next workout, I go in, start from standing, and I spiral fracture my right femur with the fake hip in there.
Damn.
So my foot's behind my head. People are turning green. A guy started that week. He never came back. It was the worst injury I've ever seen.
Wow.
And I'm just moaning. I understand. I'm cognizant enough to recognize that with a spiral fracture, with some kind of compound bone break, you take a chance of cutting an artery. And so I look at the instructor. I'm laying on the floor. My foot's behind my head. People are, and I said, if I don't make it, please tell my kids that I love them.
Wow.
And then they doctored me up, and the ambulance came up, shot me full of morphine. They fixed me up, and I fought the very day I broke my leg 1 year later at the Worlds. And I was awarded a third, fourth place, but I really got my ass kicked. But I didn't break my leg. And the doctor warned me, he said, you break your leg again, it could be amputation. You don't have enough bone left.
Wow. That's crazy.
And then when I moved a few years back, 6 years ago, I moved to Boise, got a new doctor, and I was explaining what was going on and that I wanted to get my MRI scan every year to see if there was any degradation of the joints or the bone. And of course there was. And she said, well, you have particle disease. Now I'd already written articles for Black Belt and about hips and, all this, and thought I knew everything. I had never heard of it. And it's when the parts that they put in deteriorate, even if microscopically, the parts go in and settle around the bone, your body attacks it, and it eats the bone instead of the particles. So your bones get mushy and hollow. That's why my femur broke. And that's why I had to have a third or a fourth hip replacement to replace the other side, because the doc said the bone in there, it's mushy. If you try to kick your hitch on your truck or jump out of it, you could have a catastrophic break. So we got to go in and bondo it up, So they put cadaver bone in there, bondo kind of stuff, and then they wrap it with wire. And I've got these alien claws on both sides of my hips that you can't see when I'm walking around, but you can see in x-rays, and it's horrific. But it eventually led me to having to say, okay, just so I can be mobile in my late 60s and 70s, I've got to, find another way to entertain myself.
Well, so you mentioned, writing for like Black Belt and stuff. You ever considered writing a book?
I've been getting harassed by both my wife and Farbors have been harassing me this week to get the book. And I've started a couple times, but I have a massive library. I must have, 3,000 books.
Wow. Mostly
around art reference and fiction, signed historical fiction, all kinds of collectibles. And I just love that stuff. And I have such I feel so reverent about books and respect them so much that I'm not sure I want to schlock something. It's got to move you,
Yeah.
And, but I did join a writer's group. I
Nice.
ended up speaking. I introduced Dan at the San Francisco Writers Conference. I did a best-selling book series called 6 Tasks for Century.
Okay.
And they were small chapbooks. A chapbook is a small looks handbound, and you could stick it in your back pocket. And it was a character development program where the student was tasked to do things outside of the dojo that reflected character development, like teamwork was chores. So the book had a couple pages of examples of chores you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the student was to record it, and their parents signed it off. It might take them a month or two, or, and they bring it in. And in the back page was a little certificate. The instructor would sign it, say, congratulations, give the book back. So we're not storing them at the school, stick a patch in there that said teamwork. And the guy or gal got their teamwork patch. And there was one of the booklets was about how to write a thank you letter. So there was an example in there, and then you tracked 10 people that you were going to write a thank you note to, because I wanted teachers in our local public school system to go, oh, wow, I didn't think martial arts contained anything like that.
Yeah.
It was a way for us it was outreach, it was marketing, it was character development. And Dan Millman turned me on to his agent. That's how I got invited to speak for him at the writers conference, and before him. And and Mr. Reyes and the demo team came down, and we did a demo there in front of all these writers, So I took the project to him, and I reserved the right with Century to make 6 tasks for things outside of the martial arts, like 6 tasks for people who wanted a better relationship, or 6 tasks for people who wanted to save the world, or blah, blah, blah. And I just started the UBBT at that time. It was about 2004. And this agent, who was very gracious, said, listen, because at that time, the program had brought in about 100K.
Wow.
And I said, he said, you're never going to make this from writing books. The chances would be like going into Vegas and throwing a quarter in a machine and hitting the slot, the big payoff. Stick with the program till it runs through its fruition, then come back with me and we'll work on this. And so I never made it back, and he died.
Oh man, dang.
But it was fun. And I also went to the Maui Writers Conference, and I have a short story.
Nice.
At that time, I'm writing a piece for Inside Kung Fu on Diana Inosanto, because I had met her and Ron Balicki, her husband, at Fred Dagerberg's 50th.
Nice.
Now, Fred's in his 70s now. I thought he was going to die at 50. But anyway, I went out to roast him, and as did a lot of our friends, Kovar and all those guys. And I saw Diana and Ron do a Penjak Salat demonstration with music and costume. I was like, who are these people? So I reached out to Diana, and she'd never been written about. And so I wrote about her for several magazines, including a magazine called Filipinas, which is not about penises, but about Filipino women. And I was writing this one for Karate Illustrated. I come out of the Maui Writers Conference. I'm taking classes all day. Everybody's there who's, big in writing. It's just everybody. And I come out of the Grand Wailea in Maui. I've got flip-flops and a T-shirt and shorts. And I see James Coburn standing there waiting for a car.
Wow.
And for those of you who don't know who are listening, Coburn studied with Lee and was Bruce Lee and was one of his pallbearers. Mm-hmm. So I fix my T-shirt. I think I'm going to get a quote from James Coburn. Who can do that in Inside Karate Magazine? It's impossible.
Yeah.
So I walk up to him. I come up to his side. He's taller than me. He's a big guy. And I say, excuse me, Mr. Marvin. He turns and he looks down at me with that grimace. And he says, Marvin's dead, kid. I'm Coburn. And I said, oh, my God, I know that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And he was very gracious, said to say hi to Danny. And he called him Danny. I wouldn't do it. But and, of course, Diana gave me some great quotes for the publication. And that's my other writers' conference story.
That is cool. Yeah, Diana and Ron have both been on the show also. So I've been very lucky to have them on too.
I feel late to the game. Yeah.
Well, hey, you're like episode, I think 210, I believe. So I mean,
you go.
A couple of weeks is my 4-year anniversary, so it's good.
Well, that would be for me. Let's say you were testing for 3rd, 4th, 5th Dan. That would be a requirement. We would do things that in the test that some people had already done. And I'd say, well, if you've trained in boxing, don't go with 20 hours with a boxing coach. Just drop that and replace it with nothing, or replace it with something that's important to you.
Yeah.
Because I really felt and learned through the process of that program that the ultimate test is not dictated by the teacher alone. It has to fit within the desires, ambitions, and goals of the student. Because if you don't, if those things, if you only get what you want and they're not getting what they want, you're not going to have them forever. So working into their life, like, for example, an interview process where you say, well, what's the most important thing to you? And if the guy or gal says, my family, then you say, well, how could we make, on a scale from 1 to 10, if 1 was you're completely ignoring them, and 10 was you smother them like a helicopter dad, where are you? or let's say not 10, not a derogatory thing, but 10 was as good as you could possibly be.
Yeah.
They'd say, "Oh, I'm about a 5." I'd say, "Well, what's the difference between a 5 and a 10?" He'd say, "Well, I could do this or I could do that." I said, "That'll be part of your test then."
Nice.
So now, the guy comes up to tell his story and he's crying because he's been emotionally impacted by the work that was important to him, not necessarily to me as much as it was to him. So if somebody wanted to write a book, learn an instrument, those things could easily be worked in a year. That's the kind of thing I wanted to hear about, and I wanted the media to see, and I wanted the people in my community to see, to say, we've always said martial arts isn't just about kicking and punching, but here's the examples, or many examples. And I think it esteemed the program, and I know many, many people, schools from all around the world, because I've received, notes and so on, borrowed from the program without ever taking it, and have improved their own programs or tried things because of our example. That's the ultimate. Like, for example, the black dot theory. The ultimate is not that you broke 6 boards or that you were able to run 10 miles or did a 45-foot firewalk or whatever. It's when you come to your test, you don't say, my test was I had to get in the best shape of my life, and I invited a group of my students to join me if they wanted to. And collectively, we lost 400 pounds. We did push-ups, sit-ups. We walked, and some of their parents and grandparents got involved, and they would walk with them. Now you're talking about a story that's not how great you are. It's how your work affected the lives of others. And if you're listening to this and you teach kids and you're going to run a black belt test or any test, green, whatever, I would go to your students and I'd say, we're going to make the test transparent. We're going to put it on video, all the training we do, all the coaching, selectively so that it's not boring, but, the best stuff. And our goal for this test is not just to have a successful test where you do really good and get your rank. Our goal is to do it so well that other schools around the world start copying that.
Nice.
And doing exactly the same thing because it moves them emotionally. That's what we want to do. Your commitment, your effort, your diet, the way you treat your family, the chores you're doing, your academic grades, all those things, you have to really work on them. And even when you struggle or fail, you can teach a lesson to others through that failure. So let's be examples. Let's do a test that's so interesting and so provocative and powerful that schools from all over the world learn from watching you.
That is cool.
Of course, that's best case scenario, right?
Definitely.
Oftentimes you fall way short, but you begin with the end in mind. What do we want to do? This isn't about us anymore. It's about, can we run a test that people go, holy shit, I got to do that.
Nice.
And that happened a lot, and it's still happening today at kindness programs and other activities. You'll hear about them in schools. And whether they know or not, that came from the ultimate black belt test.
That is cool. So over your 50 plus years in the martial arts, is there one philosophy that's at the top of your list?
Yeah, it's the power of practice.
Nice.
Repetitive practice. And as an artist, because when I spiral fractured my femur, one of my classmates on the West Coast demo team, a gentleman who's one of my best friends, Sujin Lee, was an artist. And he would, when we were doing TV or movies, or we were waiting for testing things, he would make things. Or I would go to his house because I'd camp out there while we were doing these week-long events, and he'd have art all over the house. So one day he took me over to the art store, bought some of the tools that I still use today. And he showed me what he was doing, and I started making a couple things here and there. Then I had kids, and the lapse of a decade, and then I broke my femur, and I picked the tools back up, and I started working on things, and I decided I was going to teach myself by doing 1,000 portraits. I've already done over 500, but I knew that application of the power of practice, that you don't expect too much from any particular piece or from any particular practice or workout. It's cumulative. And the power that we have is not the power of our punch or the power to make something that impacts people. It's the power to show up again and begin again and polish and polish and polish. That's, in a 50-year perspective, the most transformative and powerful tool that I can identify as a result of what I learned from all the instructors and all the experiences I had.
I like it. All right, I have a few fun questions we use to wrap up the interview. Let's say you decided you were going to, whether it's now or 20, 30 years ago, but you decided you were going to walk in and compete in the UFC or compete in MMA. What song is playing as you're walking into the octagon? What's your walk-up music going to be?
What would my walkout music be? Oh, man, I don't know. It's got to be something with the Stones because
nice.
I'm older than sin. So, it'd be something.
Paint it black
I avoided the UFC because I boxed with the Police Athletic League when I was a kid. And I was like the only Howley guy with all these Washoe and Paiute Indian kids. They were great kids, tougher than nails, big like tree stumps. And after I got bopped around a bit, I thought, maybe I'll just do the Tae Kwon Do,
Yeah.
I don't like getting hit so much, I'm dumb enough as it is. So, but the Stones. Okay, give me another fun question.
All right. Now this one doesn't have to be 4. I've had people give as few as 2 and as many as like 7 or 8, but 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Jeff Smith.
Nice.
Howard Jackson. Bill Wallace. Fumio Demura.
Nice.
Ernie Reyes Sr. Let me think. Who else? Ueshiba, Kano, Funakoshi.
Wow.
Also, I'm looking right at his picture right here in my Professor Okazaki, who taught Wally J. And of course, Bruce Lee was, so ahead of his time. I mean, he died at 32. And his wife, Linda, lives here in Boise, by the way.
Oh, cool. I did not realize that.
I know. It's a trip. I'm working out at the Y one day, and I'm in the circuit training room, and I look up above a room that's adjacent to that where they run classes for people with Parkinson's and stuff. And I see Bruce and Linda, the room dedicated by Bruce and Linda Codwell. Well, that's Bruce Codwell is her husband.
Yeah.
And so I send her a note and I say, Lynn, how can you be here on the Y? And she said, oh, her uncle was the director for many years. And so they donated the proceeds for that room to honor him. And I thought, well, no wonder she's in Boise. Probably came here as a kid from Seattle.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm trying to get Shannon on the show. I have the request out. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, so that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, get Diana to twist her arm if you can.
I've never met Diana. I went to 2 of the internationals back in the 90s when I was living in California, and everyone's like, oh, sometimes she'll show up there, and she didn't come to either one I was at, so I didn't get to meet her.
She's such a sweetheart.
I've heard that. I've heard that from a lot of people.
She's just a gentle soul and has been very kind to me, along with Ron. I remember I was at Fred Dagerberg's, and I'm teaching a class for a bunch of black belts. Ron's in the class, and I had just learned how to do an arm bar. So, of course, I'm teaching out there like I know what I'm doing. And Ron says, and I said, oh, have you done this before? Ron, he said, yeah, I've been doing shoot fighting for, 400 years. And, I'm still embarrassed that, it's like having, Fumio Demura in your class and saying, now reverse punch. Have you ever done this thing before? Yeah. But I got to meet a lot of, I was recently in LA for Cynthia Rothrock's premiere of her film. And I went with Dave and Farbors and to the premiere. And then the Black Belt magazine, which has been acquired by George Chung, who was a classmate of mine for many years at West Coast. And we went to the first in-person Hall of Fame Awards. And I'm telling you this because I just forgot my whole train of thought. So give me a minute and I'll bring it back. But everybody who was anybody. Oh, I know. I went to the Martial Arts Museum that Michael Matsuda runs in L.A., and I realized, you're getting old when you know every single person in the museum. You knew them for the most part, So anyway, one more question, maybe?
Hey, yeah, a couple more. Yeah, and actually a lot of the people you mentioned, I was lucky enough to interview Fumio before he passed away. He was on the show. Jeff Smith said yes. I haven't actually interviewed him yet, so he's going to be on the show. But I've been very lucky. I had James DeMille before he passed away. He was one of my very first interviews. He was like episode number 6.
You're making history.
I'm trying.
What if we could, imagine if you could listen to your great grandfather's story.
Yeah.
Imagine if we had Kano to talk to listen. And it's invaluable. This is really important work. And part of the reason that I always volunteer myself on these, not just to toot my own horn, but I recognize that these stories are lost unless somebody records them. And 40 or 50 years from now, the archive that you've created will have meaning, and it'll give direction to people who can hear right from the horse's mouth.
Yep, I hope so.
What was going on and what they learned. I hope so. It's happening.
Yeah.
You're doing it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. How about a favorite martial arts book?
Well, it has to be Oyama's This is Karate.
Nice.
I couldn't afford to buy it when I was a kid, but I could see it occasionally. And, just looking at those pictures made you want to go home and break something.
My friend has it in the original copy, and he's let me look at it a few times. I don't own it
I had
myself.
a chance to buy one that was signed by Oyama to who was the white guy who died of poisoning because I heard Don Draeger.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was signed to Don Draeger from Masayama.
Wow.
And I didn't blow the money, but I should have. I would sleep with it.
Yeah, I probably would have. So, all right, this one you may not have an answer for, but maybe you will. Maybe you'll surprise me. Favorite martial arts video game? Did you ever get into video games?
No,
all right.
No, I never played a video game.
Easy one then.
Fortunately.
Favorite martial arts TV show?
Well, it's got to be Kung Fu, and then followed closely by Sidekicks, which
I love that show.
I got to work in that show a lot.
Really? That is so awesome.
Yeah. I was in the very first episode after the pilot.
Really?
And I played a cat burglar. Yeah, and I had never acted.
Was that the one when Ernie and his friends saw the burglar and went over and tried? Yeah, that was you. Okay.
Yeah.
That is so. I just watched that episode a few weeks ago.
Oh, isn't that funny? So, Mr. Reyes, I didn't have to audition. He just got us the part. And the reason that he used the demo team with Ernie is because one is he knew that we wouldn't hurt him.
Yeah.
Because we'd done so many skits together. And then that was the primary reason. He knew he could direct us and that we had so many skits up our sleeve that it cut rehearsal time dramatically because they weren't giving a lot of, until the Matrix really, they didn't give a lot of time for fight scenes. You got in there and once they set up, you better be ready to go. So we could improvise using things that we'd done so many, many times. But I remember he says, okay, bring these shoes, fly down. So now I'm like, I'm going to Hollywood, and I fly down. There's a limo waiting there for me with my name on a little card. I get there and, I get in costume. I'm playing a cat burglar in a janitor's outfit, and I'm flirting with the extras and eating from the snack truck. And all of a sudden, they call me, and it got real. It was at that point. I walk in. There's a giant $1 million camera on a trolley with 3 or 4 people on the trolley, and it's this big, and it's right next to my face. And I'm supposed to come out of a doorway and turn and look, and Gil Gerard, who played Buck Rogers, and his associate are waiting down at the end of the hall to chase me when they see me. Well, the camera's right there, so my face is twitching. I can't control it. I did okay, but that scene, I'm supposed to run out, and a real stuntman does a wire from this high rise to that one, and there was an unfinished building that we were filming in across from this place that it was supposedly being burglarized. So my job is, after the guy does the zip line between these buildings at 10 floors up, I'm to gather my gun from a bag because the guys are chasing me and they're shooting at me from across the building. So I'm there with an assistant director on the 9th floor of this unfinished building in Burbank. And he says, well, let's walk through it. So I grab the gun, I walk up, and I'm trying so freaking hard to be an actor, and he looks at me and he says, yeah, you haven't done this before. I'm like, no, I have. And it all came out okay. But, then I shoot the guys a couple times, and then Ernie comes out and saves the day.
That is so awesome. Yeah, I met Ernie Sr. and Jr. at the Diamond Nationals when they were promoting Surf Ninjas back in the day.
And I was in Surf Ninjas.
I just saw that on IMDb. So I actually just watched that a few months ago too. So I'm hoping to get Ernie on the show, Jr. He had said yes 3 years ago, and then he had his health issues, and I haven't been able to get a hold of him since. So I sent a few messages, and I'm still hoping he'll come and do the show because I'd love to chat with him.
I'm sure he will. Yeah. He's going to be. He's just been busy. He's raising kids and doing all and working. And,
I get that.
Yeah, there's a guy who, just for anybody's information, and I've met all the great kickers, Heel Cho, and just everybody. George is an incredible kicker, George Chung.
Yep.
But Ernie, pound for pound, hardest, most talented, most ferocious kicker that I ever met.
That's awesome.
You'd be watching him do one step jump side kick at a partner, and you'd look at it and go, don't kill me. He could kill somebody with it. And I heard Bruce Lee had and I had a friend who had been a deep sea diver who could grab your wrist and squeeze it and drop you to your knees,
Jeez.
whereas I grab your wrist and we'll just skip down like we're going down the yellow brick road. Right. And I heard Bruce Lee pound for pound was intensely strong, and Ernie's like that too.
That's cool.
Super, super talented and ferocious. Like his wheel kick, his spin hook, hook kick. It could kill you. The air moves like,
wow.
And I've had a lot of people kick at me, and I would not want Ernie to ever kick me.
I would probably agree. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
Oh, well, what is my favorite? I've got to be Enter the Dragon, but I also secretly enjoyed and watched many times, and then became friends with the people in the film, Kentucky Fried Movie.
Nice.
And at the time, I was in elementary school or junior high school. I can't remember. And I was a crossing guard. And as a crossing guard, they'd give you free movie passes. And Kentucky Fried Movie was playing. And so I must have seen the damn thing 20 times. And Heel chose in it, Simon Reeve, probably Phillip, and a few other guys. And we're all associates and friends. And now, all these years later, but
that's cool.
Enter the Dragon is profoundly impactful for its presentation of the ferocious nature of Lee's ability to express combat and know the angles. And, it was way ahead of his time.
Agreed. All right. Final question. Now, this one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie. Any movie you've ever seen, favorite movie fight scene?
Oh, well, that would be one of the Bond films, the one where they're in the volcano.
Oh,
and
nice.
Don Draper was the fight coach on that.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's Sean Connery, and he gets in this prolonged fight. I think it was that, I'm pretty sure it was that one. Anyway, having watched it as a martial artist, I went, well, that was really exceptional. And then some of Kurosawa's films are remarkable. I actually watched a couple, especially I enjoyed Dreams, which was late in Kurosawa's career, but it's a remarkable film made up of small vignettes that Kurosawa supposedly dreamt. There were fragments of his dreams. And in one of the segments, it's about Van Gogh, and Lucas Light and Magic, or Film and Magic, whatever the name of the company
Industrial Light and
helps
Magic.
him. Yeah, there you go. He helps Kurosawa do this. They walk right into Van Gogh's films. Martin Scorsese plays Van Gogh in it. But it's a profoundly beautiful movie. So I wrote Kurosawa, and I was on his Christmas mailing list. I'd get a signed card, Christmas card every season for like 10 years.
That's freaking cool. That's awesome. Wow.
Every time I got it, I was like, oh my God, don't touch this.
That's awesome. Wow. Well, Tom, before I let you go, is there anything I forgot to ask you or we want to get out there really quick before we wrap it up?
Hey, everybody, just be mindful about the philosophical aspects of the martial arts. But remember, martial arts in general and being a quote unquote master are such small pieces of pie compared to the whole pie of being a human. And so when I say martial arts now, somewhere in my head, I really think life. I don't want to be a master of martial arts. I want to be a more accomplished, masterful human being. And of life. I want to master those things that can be important to you and others about life. Being good at martial arts, I've seen so many good martial artists who are just jerks, or uneducated, or unsophisticated. And when I say martial artist, I think human being. I don't want to be a good martial artist. I want to be a good human being. And I think that big picture approach opens so many doors, and it allows for interpretation from the individuals who practice. Whether your field of interest is medical or historical or scientific or otherwise, the martial arts isn't distinct from that. Like, there's no real border between California and Nevada. It's a man-made thing. It doesn't exist. It's something we do to organize our resources. And likewise, there's really no Tae Kwon Do or Jiu-Jitsu or karate or kung fu. It's all bullshit. It's all brand names. I named my style this so we could distinguish ourselves from that. And people give too much credit to the style. The real power in any practice is in the knowledge and experience of the practitioner. And yes, it's good to have a formal way to learn how to ride a bike. But once you learn and master all those skills, where does that bike take you? that's more important than who taught you how to pedal and what shoes you wear and all the very specifics like we all, obsess on over JKD or karate or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that would be my message to anybody who could make it through this extended interview to this very...
Well, Tom, seriously, this has been so much fun. I've loved hearing your story. I love all the same, connections we have with people that have been on the show and that you're friends with and stuff. And I truly enjoyed this, and I think the listeners are going to enjoy it too.
Well, let me again provide you a compliment and some kudos for doing this work, because it's absolutely valuable. You might as well be writing a world history of martial arts, but instead of interpreting through your own language, you're going right to the people and gathering their stories, their anecdotes. It's going to live long beyond you, and it's very important work for the future of martial arts, for those people who are on the quest after we're gone, who can now look back and listen and learn from those who came before them. And so congratulations on having the insight and the perseverance to do it, because it isn't easy. You had to chase me down for a couple of months, right?
Yeah. I think my record is about almost 2 years chasing someone down. So I got to be patient.
Yeah, well, that's that. I wonder where you figured how to be that patient.
Exactly. Well, seriously, I truly, truly appreciate your time, and I'm glad we got to do this.
Thank you very much. And hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Please take care of yourself. And next we meet, you can tell me what you picked up from the interview. Thank you again for the honor.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.